Hello, everybody. Clap if you can hear me loudly enough so that I know to get started. Awesome. I am very excited to be back this year. I am sad at the same time that I'm excited because I really desperately wish I was on that stage with you all. I have a very good reason to not be because I am welcoming twins with my wife into the world very shortly here, and I just couldn't risk being away. That should let you know that our future is bright enough to be inspired by because I'm willing to bring two more children into it. But that's one data point. So let's talk very rapidly and quickly. We got a lot of ground to cover. And I really look forward to all your feedback on this as we connect beyond this event and in general. So I always like to start off every talk that I give, very much so disclosing what I call myths, facts, and biases, because before you start listening to someone, especially me, you should know where that person's coming from as far as what's shaped their thinking, what hasn't. And so I just like disclosing it up front. I wished a long time ago that people would do that for me. You can take a screenshot of this. I'll duck a little bit here so that you can look up these books and things later. I'll be mentioning several of them throughout this sporadically as I make key points. But these are what I think are the most relevant to understanding what I mean by collision force. Now, let's talk about some of the myths that are out there in the lexicon or in people's mind. I heard in the last panel people talking at the end about AGI and things like that. So we'll just jump around. You can certainly peek at this graphic and dive in more. But some of the things that we have to realize is that there's a thought out there that maybe AGI is impossible, that it'll never happen. There's a thought that it'll happen by 2100 and whatever that is, 77 short years. There's a thought that it'll happen faster than that. Here's the reality. The actual worry is not about whether it happens in the next 3 to 5 years. That's very unlikely. The actual worry should be that when it happens in a decade or two, which is inevitable, that we have not properly used this time that we have now to prepare for it and to make it safe. And so the inevitability of it is a fact. The worry is misguided. We don't have to worry about robots taking over the world because intelligence, as you'll find out as we go longer into this, organic intelligence or artificial intelligence does not require a body. So this whole notion that Hollywood got it right with the Terminator is also a myth. It's not something we should worry about. We shouldn't worry about robots taking over. It's the intelligence that we have to worry about. What we should be worrying about is whether or not AI, in all its forms, broad, general, narrow, if AI's goals become misaligned with our goals at the point where it becomes competent. So these are some of the things that we'll dive into as both individuals as well as organizations. But my real purpose today is to talk very specifically about the region that you live in and work in, the Philippines, Southeast Asia, and everything around it, because the future of work is going to be completely different than the past. And at the same time, there's aspects of it that will be very familiar. So if you haven't seen this graphic, forget the one on behind me. That's the 8 billion people in the world. And you guys are well aware of your demographics, right? There's 110 million population. You have the youngest country under the age of 28 per capita. I think it's like almost 2/3 of your country, which is good and bad. The good of that is you have nothing but upside as far as your futures. You have a lot of young energy. You have a lot of young talent. It's all sitting in this room. It's all gathered this whole week. And I'm super excited again to be part of it. And at the same time, none of you in that bracket were old enough to even remember 2008's financial crisis, let alone a world without the internet. And so there's some things that we can do. And one of those things is just to understand what got us here, right? So this is the graph of human history. Now, why that matters is I'll put my finger right here. When you see Homer, who wrote the Odyssey about 4,000 years ago, which is one of the first published books in the history of humanity, there was only 100 and some odd million people in the entire planet. And shortly thereafter, we got to things like the Renaissance in 1300. There's about 190 million people. And then as you see the industrial age, when we got to the industrial age, there was 1.7 billion people. And this is where we invented machines at work doing things that made productivity increase. So this notion that humans and machines have just now begun a relationship is false, right? Humans and machines have always been at work. In Homer's Odyssey, there's actually talk about things that would be equated to not just artificial intelligence, but machines at work. And so when we go back 4,000 years, this relationship between humanity and the machines we invent is longstanding. But the impact of those machines, as you can see through time, and as we can recall through time, if we're older than the demographic that populates the bulk of your country right now, is that in the industrial age, we had an efficiency and productivity takeoff, and the future of work changed, right? So when you think about life back in the 1700s, 1500s, 1300s, 1000, 500 BC, when you go back 4,000 years, our main job as humans was to survive. So if you had a job, it was to make it through the day. There was any number of ways you were not going to. Something might eat you, you might die of starvation. But so our work was all revolving around our survival until we got to essentially the Renaissance, where now our work was about invention and creativity and things like that. And then when we scaled that in the industrial age in the late 1800s, early 1900s, our work became about productivity. It became about making things at scale, shipping stuff, but the jobs were very hands-on. It was a lot of blue-collar labor, and that was the nature of work. And we built up educational institutions to create employees to go work for the companies in the factories that did all this stuff. And when the internet became public and commercial, when ARPANET, which was a military invention and R&D project, when that became commercial, i.e. .com, and www got invented to make it easier to surf, thanks to Tim Berners-Lee, and hypertext protocol made it clickable so that we could have search engines and e-commerce and things like that, we entered the information age. The information age made our work about knowledge. It was about knowledge workers. It was about creativity. It was about sharing stuff as we got into Web 2. And then, as you see, we've now entered what's called the exponential age. And really, if you wanted to put a pin on it in history, generative AI, because AI has been around since the 80s, it's been researched for longer than that. Back in the 40s, they tried to build a human brain, which we'll talk about later. In 1960, Maxwell Maltz wrote a great book I recommend you all read called Psycho-Cybernetics, when they figured out how the brain was different than the mind. And we'll talk about that later on. But the exponential age really got kind of tipping pointed when OpenAI's ChatGPT hit the market, as all of you are ad nauseum well aware. And so what happens in the exponential age is now thinking about what it means to be a human and thinking as an exercise, as a skill, which we have long forgotten how to do, and we've long not taught how to do in mainstream schooling, becomes one of the most important skills to remember how to do. And arguably, what we're facing right now is our work, generically and broadly, is about survival again. The difference this time around is once we, hopefully, can navigate that turn and figure out how to survive a world where AGI exists, then we may be able to thrive at levels that we've never seen. And those 8 billion people have a life that is better than the one they have right now, where the wealthier continue to get wealthier and everyone else becomes commoditized and harvested for that data proxy. And so that's the hope. That's the vision that I want you to hold on to. As many problems as exist, there are equal, if not greater, opportunities, but it requires us to all recognize where we are. The wheel has come full circle from survival back to survival. The difference is this time more people than ever could thrive on the other side. So that's what we'll talk about today. Now, for those who are looking for the quick history lesson, I talked about this last year. Just a reminder, Web 1 was read-only, right? We took digital versions of analog stuff from a pre-internet era, and we slapped it up on this thing called the World Wide Web, and it was one directional. Web 2 became the read-write web. Now I could post, you could post, we could create blog, social sharing. It became a social web. The problem wasn't that. That was not the problem. That was cool. That connected us. That drove engagement. The problem was we created weapons of mass destruction in the advertising industrial complex, and we let 5 companies basically control it. And we didn't do that like on purpose necessarily. We just didn't see that free wasn't free. We were paying with something we didn't understand. We didn't know how to quantify. Many of us still today don't know how to quantify it. We were paying with our data. We were paying with our email address, except we didn't own the email address, because the only reason we had one was because Hotmail and Gmail and others figured out how to give it to us for free. Because when email was first invented in 1990s and people started using it, you had to pay for it. Then AOL in America made it America Online, and everybody got a free email. And then Hotmail and then Gmail ultimately perfected it and weaponized it. And then Facebook Messenger and everything else took it to a whole nother level. And when we did that, we had an incentive model that basically turned advertising and attention into the ultimate day trade. And the proxy over that data is the equivalent, as I just said in a podcast interview backstage before we came here, it'd be the equivalent of oil, which 25 years ago, if you looked at the richest 5 countries in the world, they were all energy companies because oil was the ultimate commodity. And the last 10, 15 years, right, S&P 500 is made up of 500 companies, but 7 of them dictate the multiple of that market cap, right? And all 7 of those are tech companies. 5 wealthiest companies in the planet today are tech companies. Why? Not because they're technology, but because of what's moving through that technology. That thing that's moving is the data proxy. And the ownership is at the technology company level, not at the edge, not at the user level, which is what Web3 is about. Web3 is where the user and the creator own, again, or the user itself or the brand itself owns the data proxy. Again, it doesn't mean the business incentive changes around that data. It means that you're participating in the CPM. What is an example that we can all understand? We're in the Philippines right now. There's 7,000 islands. I don't know how many people are in this room. Let's just say there's 7,000. Let's say we each own one island. We own a house on one island. That dirt underneath the ground is ours. If an oil company came to us anytime in history, including today, and said, we've discovered an ocean of oil, a commodity that is worth something, underneath your plot of land, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, they would pay you, or they would have to offer you the ability to have a lease so that they could drill on that oil. And when they extracted it, you and I would get a royalty. That's been going on forever. You could choose as the owner of that land whether or not you wanted to participate in that lease. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you're worried about your environmental plants. Maybe you're worried about your pets. Maybe you were worried about any number of things, cancer. But maybe you wanted to get rich, and maybe you weren't worried about those things. You as an owner of that land had proxy over that land and its mineral rights, and therefore you could make the decision to have that oil. And they would pay you for that right, upfront and in a royalty basis. Data is different, isn't it? What's wrong with Web 2? Everything. Why? Because now none of us walk around without one of these in our hand. And guess what we did? One way or the other, whether we subsidize it monthly or not, we paid, in my case, $1,400 for this iPhone 14, $1,400 US. I don't even know how much that is in pesos, a whack ton. And the first thing that it makes me do is log in with an Apple ID, not a Chris ID, an Apple ID. If I have a Samsung Galaxy, if I have a Huawei phone, if I have anything that's on Android, it's the first thing it does, it makes me sign in with a Google ID. I don't get a choice. I have the illusion of choice. I pick purple or black or silver or white, and I get harvested. That's the equivalent of having an oil company come to your front door and you pay them to extract all of your value out of your land and get nothing for it. We've done that for the last 15 years. For those of you who are 28, you've been doing it your entire life. You've been harvested, not just with your phone, but with the Ring doorbell, with the smart whatever, with the smart this, with the smart that. And that is what Web3 is about. This is the movement back to the edge. This is the movement where those data proxies can still be monetized, but you and I get our fair share. We get our royalty, or we get to choose whether we want to opt out. Why is that important? Because if we don't do that, ladies and gentlemen, 50% or more of the jobs that exist today will be gone in the next 5 years. 50% of the jobs we need in the next 10 years have not even been thought of, conceived, or invented yet. And there's at least a 5-year gap before we do that. And there's 8 billion people on this planet that aren't billionaires. And so we have got to solve this problem. And it's not going to be a government that does it, because there's no amount of money the Philippines or the US government can print that is sustainable. And yet, one thing that is data is growing at a level, and the ability to refine that data and turn it into something of value is growing at a level that is exponential. And AI will only compound that growth even further. And so we cannot have a world where AI is built and pushed on top of Web 2 infrastructure in an arms race between 5 publicly traded companies that want to beat the other, or we will not be here. That's the bad news. The good news is you're sitting in these seats. There's a lot of smart people here. There's a lot of great companies here, and we're going to solve it. So take a breath and realize that we are also doing this while we're navigating what's called a polarized world. Now, Edelman's Trust Barometer is something I've been following for years since we wrote Digital Sense. Travis Wright, who I know you saw yesterday, who's my brother from another mother, my co-author and my co-host and a lot of things. Donald Lim, shout out to you, bro. Same thing. Jessica, Janelle, thank you guys for, again, and everybody else who convened this thing. I love you all. I miss you all. Edelman's Trust Barometer is something you should look at. They put out great research, great reports. You don't have to subscribe or pay to it. And every year they look at the state of trust in and across society and across multiple societies. And some of the takeaways from this year were, we live in a polarized world. Now, one of the books that was in my bias came out in 2011. It's written by a phenomenal woman named Rebecca Costa. It's called The Watchman's Rattle. You want to read it. The net of the Watchman's Rattle says that human beings, whenever societies have collapsed, and collapse is not necessarily like things crumbling down, that happens sometimes, but really what collapse means is a reversion to something simple, right? To a simpler system. It's when markets collapse and we go back to bartering for a spell, not forever, but we go back to it because things just get way too complex, right? Well, we never understood in the first couple times that collapse happened in society. The Roman Empire collapsed, Dark Ages, all that. And then we had the Khmer in Cambodia, that collapsed. And so when they looked at these things, they realized, well, what was the common link? And she published this book about the common link was essentially human beings invented complexity faster than their cognitive ability to deal with it. What's that mean? It means we invent complexity in picoseconds, and our brain evolves over millions of years, and we cannot think our way out of the problems we've created. That's what causes collapse. What are the super memes, as they say, that show up in society? And she wrote about these in 2011. What are they when they show up? How do you know this is starting to happen? Well, you see things like gridlock, political gridlock. You see things like irrational correlations, right? This is where we say, oh, because employment is at 3.5% in America, and we've created 13.5 million jobs, that the economy is doing great. Okay, no, it's not. If you're not in America right now, most people don't feel the economy is doing great. With $6 a gallon gasoline in California, with eggs that are costing $8.99 a dozen, with people can't put their hands on $5,000 or more if there's an emergency in their family. 60 some odd percent of the populace here, that is the wealthiest supposed country in the world, is upside down on their earned income versus expenses, $5,000 a year, which means they're going $5,000 deeper in credit card debt or what have you every single year. So no, irrational correlation. Yes, 3.5% unemployment rate's good. Yes, 13.5 million new jobs is good, but it doesn't mean it's a good economy, right? So when we look around these things and we can see fact versus belief gets, dominant, we go, wow, Rebecca, you were right. And then Edelman comes out and says, oh, by the way, in 2023, right, you are navigating a polarized world. Less than 50% of the people in 6 countries in the G20 and 9 on the fence believe that they can't trust government. 60% of people trust businesses. That's still 40% that don't. So there's a lot of things that you're navigating as a brand and a business, and it comes back to transparency and people feeling disconnected from it. If you don't follow Misha online, Misha Da Vinci, she's great on Twitter. She put a thing up. I'd give her a shout out. She put a couple different things. The future of this is that, the future, and you'd see all the Web3 stuff here. I'm going to focus on the one that she said, the future of work is AI. Okay, well, what does that mean for humans? What does that mean for BPOs in the Philippines or those who work in them and who do a phenomenal job? Well, it means something's different. It means the future of work is AI, and now we have to figure out where your piece of that work is. and what the skills are to drive it. What are the value drivers for 4 billion people under the age of 45 that are planning on being in the workforce or need to be to raise their families and do whatever for the next 20 or 30 years while all this is happening? There's 4 billion people out of the 8 billion on this planet under the age of 45. And they value different things. They value mobility, not shocking to any of you. They value connectivity, again, not a shock. And they value community. This is different than the two generations before them. This is completely different. And so as work is transforming under those norms and those values, at the same time, work is transforming even faster because of technology. The compound annual growth rate of blockchain and AI as an industry over the next 4 years, we already started this in 2020, is 23.6%. What that means, if you know the law of 72, what that means is basically every 3 years, the value of that market doubles. Now, that's only going to increase faster, in my opinion, because March of this year was a big breakout. But again, starting in 2020, that was the case. Look at this number up top. $80 billion will be reduced in costs by 2026 because of bots. And what does it say? Contact center agent jobs. Last time I checked, you guys have one of the best BPO economies in the entire planet. You stole it away from India, but $80 billion of it's going away by 2026. What's going to replace it? Something to think about. If you're a BPO, by the way, I want to talk to you because we have some solutions in the portfolio that I think we can build something awesome with. So at the end, schedule some time. Doubling the market size every 3 years is a good thing if you're an investor. But if you're not an investor, it could be bad. The generative brand. What is this all getting at? The power of AI colliding with Web3 visualized. I did my best to try and create a picture to work from. We're going to start and take a breath for a second, and we're going to end this on a high note. And I think you're going to feel a lot better than maybe right now, hopefully, if I do my job right. When we think in pictures, we don't have any control over that. If I say to you, think of your house, every single one of you right now saw something go across the screen of your mind, and it was clear as day, and it was your front door. And when I say go inside, you're walking inside your house. You're not walking inside mine. You're not walking inside the person sitting next to you. And it's so crystal clear, the picture worth 1,000 word things is absolutely true. And when I say think of your mind, what do you all see? Most of you, if you're honest right now, the picture that showed up when I said think of your mind, you saw the brain. And as I say those words, you realize, but the brain is not my mind. You just don't have a picture of your mind to work from. So you replaced it with the closest thing you could think of. Well, the brain is a switching station. It's an organ. Once our soul, however you relate to that, once our spirit and our mind leaves our body, this meat suit that I'm sitting in right now talking to you with, the brain has no longer any value. Mind is the movement. Well, what's another word for mind? Another word for mind is intelligence. Another word for mind is cognition. These are synonymous terms. Pick your favorite, right? Lay people understand mind. Scientists like to say things like cognition, and intelligence is pretty ubiquitous for anyone with a high school degree. Okay, they're all the same thing. They are a movement. What does that mean? It means that they are energy in an ethereal form that is trying to make its way through, to and through us, or a switching station in this case, into some manifestation in the physical world. They are thought becoming things, as Napoleon Hill wrote. But I can't control and harness the power of thought. I can't harness intelligence, organic intelligence, i.e. human intelligence, if I don't have a picture of the mind. What we're trying to build with our artificial intelligence, what we've done really well is build narrow artificial intelligence, where we have harnessed that through ones and zeros and everything else through logic and reasoning. We've been able to harness the power of narrowly directed intelligence. What is AGI, artificial general intelligence? A coined term by Ben Goertzel, who's one of our partners in a portfolio company called Twin Protocol. Ben Goertzel coined that term. It's been called several other things, the singularity. What does it mean? Here's what it actually means for those who haven't heard of this before. When we reach AGI, artificial general intelligence, that is the moment in time where artificial intelligence, the machine, becomes as smart as the dumbest human being on the planet. 12 months after that moment, that same machine will recursively have learned and become smarter than all 8 billion of us. That's what we call exponential growth. That is the inevitability. Now, when we get there does not matter, because if it takes us 50 years to have a machine be as smart and sentient as the dumbest human on the planet, within 12 months, it'll be smarter than all humans on the planet. And why does smarter matter? For the same reason that we can still live amongst tigers, because we are smarter than them. Now, we don't, hopefully, murder and poach tigers. Some people did, some people do. We, humans, decided to make that illegal and protect tigers. We protect elephants now. We try and save the whales now. But the reality is we are smarter than them, and so we can control something exponentially larger than us, more powerful than us, stronger than us, maybe meaner and nastier than us. And so when something becomes smarter than an entire species, it can control them. Again, back to when AI becomes competent, forget when it becomes conscious. When it becomes competent, if its goals are misaligned with humanity's, we're in trouble. If not, we're in nirvana. As a brand, whether you're a personal brand or whether you are a corporate enterprise brand, I heard it mentioned on the last panel, there is no point in building generative widgets into your operating stack without owning that stack. And so you cannot build a generative brand if every time somebody comes out with a better version of Stable Diffusion or a better version of Midjourney that you love so much, when you plug it in, you have to retrain your entire thing. It defeats the whole purpose of what we call generative. Generative means to recursively continue to get better and exponentially get better at being in relationship with the customer I care about, i.e. the brand. It's a relationship. It's ever living and ever breathing. So this is how it works. You want to have a native AI hub. Native meaning something you control the training data on. You own the inputs. You are in control of that. Then you can start to earn and consume on both sides of this, the spatial web being three-dimensional websites, blockchain-based internet, right? That's the spatial web. AI agents augmenting human workers and people and consumers purchasing from each other in marketplaces using tokens because it's more efficient and less costly than using dollars over the Swift rails. And then communities in business, in partnership with brands, true communities of common interest in circular economies. That is what a generative brand organization looks like. That is your goal. That is what we call Trillions Mountain. It is not what we call PC Peak. If you want to read a phenomenal book, again, back, I think from 2011, it was written by Mickey McManus and several others who invented essentially what became AutoCAD at Maya Design. And they wrote a book called Trillions, and it was all about when we hit this point where we have 1 trillion sensor devices in the planet, and it was going to be somewhere between now and 2030. And when we have that, essentially, we've just created something equivalent to the number of cells in a human body. We have about 7 trillion cells every 7 years. All 7 trillion of them get refreshed and reborn, right? And so the cells talk to each other. They're peer-to-peer. The brain organizes the mind, the consciousness flowing through this meat suit, and directs its activities. Some of it is conscious when I'm thinking about what I want to achieve, who I want to get, in touch with, an idea that I have, something I'm creating. But while I'm doing that, the subconscious mind is making API calls in the theoretical example here to my lungs that are cheap and not burning a lot of sugar, not burning a lot of intelligence, because they've been optimized to keep the main thing running, because it's never going to change. I can't live if I'm not breathing. I can't live if my blood's not pumping. And so I don't need to burn intelligence, i.e. tokens, in some SaaS model to keep my body moving so that my brain can think. This is how almost everything that I've seen that's gotten VC funded in the last 12 months, they're violating this. They're telling you that they have a SaaS model, but it's Web 2 dynamics with generative AI, and it's all going to go bust. because there's no moat in that business and there's no real value to an enterprise in that business. So if you're investing in this space, if you're putting infrastructure into this space, as someone earlier on the panel said, and I apologize, I didn't catch their name, they're right. You need to be looking at tools that allow you to own the stack, own the training data, and not have to go invest hundreds of millions of dollars to build large language models, but benefit from them. And as an organization, this is the mountain you're trying to climb. And it's a whole different mountain where AIs are at work along with humans in the loop. And then eventually AIs are doing a lot of the work and humans are focused on the strategy and the direction they want to take it. We wrote about this in a new book. You guys can all get on the allow list. Travis, right now, it'll be a conversational book. You literally don't even have to read it. You'll be able to just ask it questions that are specific to you. And the book will read you the answers that you need based on the questions you ask it using a lot of these things. It's called Beyond Digital Sense. It's coming out in January. We'll start dropping that. It talks about 3 layers and 2 loops. This is a framework we don't have time to get into, but I'm happy to talk with you about it. You can find videos on the old framework from the original version that didn't speak specifically about generative AI, but that talked about putting the customer in the center of your business. A lot of that stuff still holds true. Would love to have conversations with anybody who's interested in that, about that. But again, get on the allow list and you'll be the first guys and gals to have that one. Now, what does a human do if they're worried about this or they just want to know what their advantage is? Stop investing your time on like craving attention. Start treasuring your cognition, i.e. your mind, your ability to think. Invest in the skills that matter. What are those skills? They're different than becoming great at Facebook marketing or social. You're probably already good at that. Keep doing it, fine. Keep taking the check. But as you notice here, we've got nature outside. Now, I've been to your country and I've been to the volcanoes and I've been up to the mountains and not enough of them. I can't wait to come back. But you got some of the most beautiful places to go and get away from it all of anybody. And that's good for the mind. That's good for your body. That's good for your soul. That nurtures your creativity. That gives you a different kind of dopamine that you're in control of. That's organic, that's sustainable, that's not based on algorithmic, Pavlovian, repetitive nature that is designed to doom loop you into worry and doubt and fear. On the opposite of worry and doubt and fear are freedom, excitement, and optimism. They're 2 sides of the same coin. But when you're in the doom loop of scrolling and when you're on screens all the time and when you're in technology all the time, you're not getting better at being a human. You're getting better at being technology's slave. And I'm all in technology. But this is what you do. You read the classics. Don't read business books if you've already read a lot. Sure, read Watchman's Rattle, read those. They're important. But go read the classics, especially if you're under the age of 40. And if you're over the age of 40, go read from the 1300s. Go read Don Quixote. Go read things that you may have never read, but you've heard of. Why? Because you'll realize the depth of our humanity and our relationship to innovation through time. You'll have context that you don't have right now. Write on physical paper with your hands and a pen or pencil because it works different. You ink it and you think it. It changes the way that your biology functions. Look in the face of people that you're sitting across from versus a screen. Build your empathy, optimize your empathy, and spend this time this week as I wrap up getting to know somebody, not because you're trying to transact, but because they are there sitting with you in the Philippines right now, hungry for answers, hungry for opportunity, filled with excitement, filled with some uncertainty, and mostly because I've been there, probably filled with some of the most loving people you're ever going to meet. So that's how you get your edge in the next 10 years, is you focus on the things that make you human, because machines are far away from being human. And we're better at it than they are. But they're better at a lot of the other things, most of the other things. This is where we are right now. There is no more time to waste and contemplate, consider, and discuss whether this is happening. The time to make sure that it's safe or safest, the time to put our fingerprints, as I said last year, in the wet cement that has already been poured on the future is right now. So I commend you for being here. And the takeaways are data is the new uranium, not the new oil, it's the new uranium. It's a tool and it's a weapon. The proxy must go back. The incentive models must go back. Your brand has to be able to control its training level data
your consumption and your asset holding must be in your possession. You must have the choice through that data proxy whether you want to participate or not into the myriad of marketplace opportunities that exist within that advertising industrial complex. You must and we must push back on business models that no longer serve us and that threaten us as AI compounds. And we must start to connect with one another at a level we've never done before, starting with ourselves. If you want to get in touch with me, it's very easy. You can follow me on YouTube. You can go to chrisjsnook.com and there's a bunch of resources there. You can join the allow list for Travis, Danny, and Mai's new version of Digital Sense, Beyond Digital Sense. And if you'd like a demo on nBrain or Twin Protocol or Medicaid or some of the portfolio companies that I'm happy to introduce to you that solve a lot of these infrastructure problems that we're talking about in the generative brand, just scan that QR code and request a demo. And if you want me to come speak, as soon as these babies are here, I'll be back on the road again. I'm happy to do Zooms like this, and much love to all of you. Have a great rest of the show, everybody.